as it were, without introducing sort of philosophical terms of art that have become sort of second nature. And I'm going to try as hard as possible to kind of keep it plain. No doubt I'll end up missing the subject, but that's what I'm going to try to do. And I'm going to argue for something sort of a bit depressing, which is that action theorists should probably kind of do nothing. Actions are just fine as they are. It's not obvious that the action theory needs your help, which is, a hard thing for us all to take on. But that's not quite true. There's loads of things we could do, just not quite the things we've spent our time doing. So I'm going to start with the question, what happens when I act? And I'm going to take advisedly, I know it's an unusual case, but I want this kind of case. Suppose I act and I raise my arm. Okay, two questions arise. You're starting, you've come this new topic. Let's do actions now. Two questions arise to the philosopher of what you should do now. The question I've called Ness. What's needed for it to be true that I act? Necessary. Ness is for necessary. What's needed for it to be true that I act? And the second question that might arise is, what is enough for it to be true that I act? Other than that I act. So we set about answering the necessity question, the question, what's needed when I act? Obviously things like the world, my parents needed to meet. I'm setting aside all those rather more background conditions, more local conditions for what's needed for me to act. I think there are sort of four that I've identified. There's an agent condition, so I must exist when I act. My arm couldn't have risen without me. So there must be an agent if there's an action. Let me just say, I'm going to assume that I am this thing here, this Homo sapien, this animal, Lucy O'Brien, born to her parents. That's going to be a starting point for me. So when I say I must exist, I mean this thing must exist for me to act. Change claim. Notice I've got half a bracket there. I'm obviously not sure. Yeah, anyway. Change claim. I change things when I act. To act is to change things. And then I make a self-change claim. Why? Well, I don't think I can change anything unless I change this thing. Anything else I change, I have to change in virtue of changing this thing here. Okay? I wish I could just change things by willing them, but I don't. I have to get out of bed. I have to make the moves, and to do that, I have to change this thing. The on-purpose claim. I change things on purpose whenever I act. It doesn't mean that every change I bring about when I act, I bring about on purpose, but whenever I act with purpose. Okay, as I said, I took the second claim that action requires self-change. Notice this rather nasty phrase, self-change. That's deliberate. Not to be annoying, but that's deliberate because I want to try and avoid locutions like, I change myself, because I think that brings all sorts of baggage with it. The main thing is that I change. When I act, I change. I change. I can only change the non-me world, as I said, by changing. That's the only way I can do it. And so whenever I act, I change. So what about the purpose claim? What is it to change on purpose? Well, if I think of all the changes that this animal undergoes, there are loads of them, most of them, that I can't bring about on purpose, or at least not directly. And some I can't bring about on purpose at all. So I can't grow on purpose. Okay, that's just up to, I suppose I can eat lots. I could go sideways on purpose, maybe. I can't heat up on purpose. I certainly can't raise the temperature in sort of bits of my body. Maybe indirectly I can. Maybe I could move myself to anger, but that would be indirectly for me. I can't wrinkle on purpose. Try as I might. Just can't do it. So what are the kind of change that I can bring about on purpose? Well, indirect changes, and some of those changes are changes of a type that we might think are the kind of changes that I can bring about directly. So I can do this, right? I can indirectly raise one arm by doing something else. But I'm interested really in getting to the sets of actions, the self-changes I can bring about on purpose directly. Unfortunately, there's lots of them. I can jump, I can run, I can move my legs around, I can move my arms, mouth, tongue, eyebrows, eyelids. Some people swear that they can move their ears. So there's a certain set of animal movements, which I'll call, again, rather barbarously, me movements. Why? Because they're just movements of me. And those are the things that I think we can do directly and purposefully. By the way, action theorists tend to call that set of animal movements, or me movements, bodily movements. And that's fine, they are bodily movements. But again, I think I want to avoid the idea that it's something other than me involved in this movement. Okay, so when we've set ourselves the question, what happens when I act, what's needed for me to act, and we've got these conditions, we're pursuing the on-purpose condition. I hope we've narrowed down a set of self-changes that we can do on purpose. But we might want to know, what does that mean? What is it about these self-changes that I can do them on purpose that other kind of changes I can't? So what am I imputing when I say that I've brought about a change on purpose? Well, one way to ask the question is to look at two different cases. Look at a case where I move on purpose and look at a case where I don't. So take my arm moving up because I moved it, and my arm moving up because there's some blowing thing that sort of drifts it into the air. And then we do a certain kind of arithmetic to Wittgenstein, and we ask, what's left over if I subtract the fact that my arm moves up from the fact that I raise my arm? And this is at the pursuit of trying to get at the question, what is it when I do these things on purpose? And we say things like, well, when my arm was just blown up, I didn't want it to go up. I didn't believe that moving in a certain way would take it up. I didn't intend to raise it. I didn't try to raise it. It just happened. And this little list, the belief and desire which I'll call a primary reason, as Davidson does. That's just really to cut out the number of things on my list. Nothing's going to go into that label. And intending and trying. Now, all those things I absolutely think do go on when we do something on purpose. And that's all we're doing at this stage. We're trying to identify things that do go on. But we've approached it in a certain way. We've approached it as if we're going to ask, other than the hand going up, what else happens? So we get our list. You know, what do we have? What's happened when Lucy O'Brien's raised her arm? Well, one of the things you have is that you have Lucy O'Brien. You can't have her arm rising without having her. You have a primary reason. You have a belief and desire pair, let's say, that I desired to raise my arm. And I had perhaps some belief about how to do it. I had the intention to do it. Now, my intention was complicated. I had the intention to raise my arm. I also had the intention to give you an example, and so on. But we have the intention, at least, to raise your arm. Some people think that I tried to raise it, that I wouldn't have managed to raise my arm if I hadn't tried. Okay, I'm not going to argue about that. I think you don't, but I'm not arguing about that. And my arm went up. You all saw it. I'm not denying that. That's on the list. So I'm happy with this various list of things that I think are needed to be in place when my arm goes up. We haven't said anything about whether these things are independent of my arm going up, whether they're things I can understand without understanding action. I just think I agree that these things have to be in place. So let's assume that our answer to Ness is at least partly answered by that list. Okay, the trouble starts when we take two further steps. That is, we take the list that's our best attempt to answer Ness, what's needed, as an answer to what's sufficient. Sufficient, remember, was the question, what being the case, what list of things is needed for it to be enough to be that it's true that I acted. And the trouble starts when we try to say, you know what? It turns out that that act, my raising my arm, is actually not a single unified element in our psychology. It's molecular in some way. It's composed of a number of other things, and in particular it's composed of all or some of the things in the list that you gave in your answer to Ness. Has anyone got a watch I could borrow? Yours looks too fancy. I'll borrow Doug's crap one. Okay. Two sorts of reasons we might have to worry about whether the answer to Ness is going to add up to anything like an answer to sufficient. Okay, our first sort of worry is a kind of circularity worry, that you might think, look, it's true that I need to intend, desire, try to raise my arm and whatever when I act. But to know what all those things are, actually we already need to know what an action is. So if we're involved in an explanatory project that's going to try and reduce what an action is, it's necessary conditions, they're fine, but if we're going to try and embark on this explanatory project to say what an action is and build it out of these components, then they'd better be independent of what an action is. But, of course, to intend to raise my arm, to desire to raise my arm, to try to raise my arm, are all things I do, or I can understand what it is I'm doing, if I know what it is to raise my arm. So they don't seem to be independent of already having a grasp on what it is to raise one's arm. So here's a nice semi-quotation from a paper by Doug Lavin and Matt Boyle called Goodness and Desire. It's a striking fact, they say, about the reductionist. The reductionist on my story is the person who's trying to give an answer to sufficiency and trying to give a reductive answer to sufficiency by appealing to this list of things. That they tend to insist on rewriting desire ascriptions. Well, you could change for that not only desire ascriptions, but also intention ascriptions and trying ascriptions, which we would colloquially express by saying S wants to do A, S intends to do A, by transforming what follows wants, or intends, into a proposition, as in S wants that, S does A. Now that's a handy thing to do because it hides to some extent the fact that you've already got the action type embedded in the description of the desire or intention. Okay, the more famous, and the reason that philosophers who are given up trying to give reductive theories of actions, the kind of case they worry about are sets of counterexamples. So you build your best reductionist story you can, which is a certain kind of sum, right? You've got an action if you've got a belief and a desire and an intention and a trying, and then you've got the movement of the animal, and then you've got some sort of perhaps causal relations or non-agential relations between them. And they try to offer some kind of definition in those terms. And of course, you know, the nice irony of this is the person who has tried to do that most and to whom it's most important has also come up with the most convincing counterexamples to the prospect and declared himself to have despaired of answering it. My graduate student, Alec, came along and said, look, I've found the confession. He despaired of answering it. Well, here's a case. This actually isn't Davidson's case, original case. Oh, God, what have I done there? This is my adapted version of it, where I've thrown in intentions and tryings and what have you. A climber might want to rid himself of the weight and danger of holding another man on a rope. And he might know that by loosening his hold, he could rid himself of the weight and danger. I don't know why I've added his fortune. He may intend to drop the climber. Right, say he drops, maybe ages ago he intended to drop the climber. And he may try to do so. But his actually trying might so unnerve him. Like, you know, in the act, he thinks, what am I doing? Have I come to this? So his actually trying so unnerves him that it causes him involuntarily to loosen his hold. Okay, and yet it might be the case that he never chose, this is Davidson, to loosen his hold, nor did he do it intentionally. So you can have all the things going on, you can tick off your list, but not have an action. Now, if Davidson's going to despair, I think it's just fine for me to. I mean, this is an argument from authority. I've gone through the arguments. I can't think of any better. And as I'll come to later, I actually can't even think of a reason for trying to do better. So I think we've got a hypothesis. Maybe we should take actions to be prime. Okay, maybe there are core notion here. We don't need to seek to understand them in other terms. Okay, now the claim that some phenomena is prime has become so the dominant associations people have with that claim are Williamson's claim that knowledge is prime. And Williamson chose his word very well. Because actually it's a word that has two distinct uses. Now, as a matter of fact, Williamson wants both those uses, right? He wants to make claims involving both those uses. But if we're going to use the word, then we better untangle what it is that we might be claiming. So what do we mean when we say that something's prime? So we might mean that it's basic in some way, that it's not factorizable or divisible into other phenomena. So it's prime in the sense of a prime number is prime. It is what it is and is not to be understood in terms of other things. Prime in that sense, prime in the sense of basic, can be true of lots of things. There are lots of elements that aren't factorizable or composable into other elements. But X is prime can mean something like X is first in some ordering. So prime in the sense of prime minister, or in some ordering. Or prime in the sense of a prime cut, the best cut that the butcher's offering. So it's primary, it comes first in some way. Okay, now I want to pursue the question as to whether we should treat actions as prime by thinking about, well, maybe we can pursue an analogy with knowledge. So in just the way that Williamson has claimed that knowledge is prime, maybe action's going to turn out to be prime in the same kind of way. So what is involved in Williamson's knowledge as prime? Well, as I said, he picked his word carefully. But first, let me just be clear about what we might mean. So we might be claiming, if we claim that knowledge is prime, that knowledge is basic. That it's a basic epistemic and psychological phenomena that's not to be reduced or fully analyzed by more basic psychological or epistemic phenomena. Okay, I've switched there to... Never mind. Or we might be claiming that knowledge comes first in some ordering. And so, obviously, for Williamson, I'm never quite clear exactly what his hopes are for knowledge. I mean, I think they might be total world domination. But anyway, what he clearly thinks is that we should understand other epistemic phenomena, actually probably some psychological phenomena, but in terms of knowledge. Okay, so we could have two correlative terms if we were to pursue the analogy with knowledge. We could have two correlative terms if we were claiming that actions are prime. So they could be Basic psychological phenomena are not to be reduced to or fully analysed in more basic terms, or we could be claiming that action comes first. Action has a claim to primacy over other practical or psychological phenomena. In particular, primacy over the other things in our list when we were looking for necessary conditions for action. Okay, I'm suggesting we pursue, as it were, the most modest option. And that is that we pursue the actions are basic option rather than the actions are first option. So I just want to note some things. I mean, really what I want to do is note how strong, really, the knowledge is first claim is. So first of all, if you had a sort of ambitious knowledge is first claim, then it's directly in competition with the action is first claim. So you'd have to choose which one you were pursuing. It's very strong. What it says is, yes, we've got these, perhaps, you might be generous about how many basic phenomena there are, but it's strong in that it says that, it's strong and says that we can explain all these other phenomena. I'm not sure you can, in the end, take them to be basic if you're it depends how strong your knowledge first claim is, but it's demanding that a whole array of phenomena come to be explained by one single claim, one single concept or relation. It's systematic philosophy. That's one of the other things I want to note about it. It's building a system. And to some extent, it's a form itself of reductionism. It's a form of reductionism about explanatory resources. The idea that our philosophical explanations have to bottom out in some way by just a few basics. Okay, now I think it may be that philosophy is in the end systematic, and it may be, but it's an ambitious program to take on. I'm not assuming that actions are first in anything like that claim. I'm just assuming that they're basic and not that they're first. I mean, if I was to claim anything, if somebody said, you've got to choose, O'Brien, what's first, then it's not going to be actions. It's going to be agents, if anything. Partly because of what I said about action. Okay. So what are we saying? Let's go back. So I'm just making the basic claim. I'm just saying actions are basic. What are we saying when we say actions are basic? Well, here's a technical expression, PPPs. PPPs are personal level psychological phenomena. Okay, so what we're denying is that actions are personal level psychological phenomena that are composed of or analysed in terms of more basic personal level psychological phenomena and their relations. That's a relative claim. It's not a very strong claim. So it's important to emphasize that I'm not claiming that somehow actions are basic particulars in the inventory of the universe. Okay? If the scientific image is right, then I'm going to have to cede that there's a reduction of what actions are in terms of microphysical particles. And I'm not claiming that actions are independent of other PPPs. Nor am I claiming that they're independent of other non-psychological phenomena, whether it's movements of the body, muscle contractions, neural activities, motor commands, or anything else in your list. So in claiming that actions are basic, I'm not making any claim that somehow this animal could act, as it were, without her body doing stuff. Well, without this animal's more low-level activities taking place. Does that mean, if we go for an actions as prime hypothesis, approach, does that mean we say nothing? Does that mean we've really got no work to do as action theorists and we better go off and talk about something else? No. Am I just saying something like, well, actions, they are what they are and not another thing? Wise, true, but, is that all we can say? I think there's loads of things we could say other than to try and give a story about actions as compossible or reducible to other PPPs and their relations. So we can give normal and necessary conditions on actions. We can clarify the nature and consequences of those conditions. We can give an account of the relation between actions and other psychological phenomena. We can give normal causes and consequences. I've said that already. And we can learn about, remember, blame duck. We can learn about what sorts of physiological occurrences realize them. Okay, so all I've done actually so far is appeal to Davidson's own skepticism, or his despair, and describe what I think the claim is. I'm now going to try and give a couple of short arguments. Well, that might be pushing it a bit far, but I'm going to put forward some considerations in favor of taking actions to be basic. And the first argument I'll call the argument from multiple sources. Okay, so prima facie, this is the basic thought. The basic thought is that the reductionist is trying to give an account of what actions are. It thinks, okay, we've got some worldly phenomena. I'm going to try and give you an account of what actions are by telling you what chain of events had to precede that worldly change. And my thought is that we've got good reason to think when we look at human action that enormously different things precede the action that's carried out. That the prospects of coming to a strict account of, are actions always going to involve trying? Well, sometimes maybe they involve trying, and sometimes maybe they don't. Do actions always involve an intention? Well, I'm sure I'd act better if I sometimes, as it were, formed an intention before I acted. So suppose I take some sort of action, I drink a beer. It's very natural for us to think, well, is she drinking, is that just a habit? Is it some sort of automatic action? Is she drinking from addiction because she's got some sort of a compulsion to drink that? Maybe I'm just drinking out of politeness. Maybe I'm drinking out of thirst. Maybe I'm drinking out of social nervousness. That's a very common or garden reaction to the sort of sets of things we might call upon when we want to explain, as it were, why somebody did what they did. we don't tend to, and we certainly don't illuminatingly give explanations by just saying, oh, well, she desired this and she intended that, and so on. Okay. Arguments from explanatory role. The ubiquity of appeal to actions in explanation. So I just want to point out the extent to which if actions aren't basic, why are almost all our human explanations of what people are up to framed in terms of what they did? Or so many of our human explanations of what people are up to are framed in terms of what they did. So this is an example that I had in my book. I'm angry with Elmore because he made a V sign at me in public and embarrassed me. Okay, I'm angry with him because he made a V sign at me. My anger is not obviously explained, has anything to do with the fact that he tried to make a V sign, or he intended to. If he just intended to and not done it, then I wouldn't have minded. Nor is it explained by his body kind of going, can I do V signs on the film? You know, he fell and went like this. That could be really embarrassing. I mean, I could think, everyone thinks Elmore made a V sign at me. But I'm not going to be angry with him because... Now, we should expect, given our pessimism about producing a list that's going to add up in all cases to sufficiency for action, we should be pessimistic about giving a list in this sort of case. But even if we could, it's a really odd way to think about the explanation of my anger. The explanation of my anger isn't even because he desired to do it, intended to do it, tried to do it, his arm went like that. The explanation of my anger is that he did it. So, you know, I seek revenge because he killed my sister. I didn't seek revenge because his body went like this and he had an intention, he had a desire, and they all fit together in the right way. Okay, the point about this, obviously there are answers the reductionist can give, but the point about this is there must be serious pressure to give up our very everyday common sense appeal to actions in our explanations. They're ubiquitous, and it's going to be very costly to give them up. So, and as I said, that would be okay if we had some sort of reason to expect that there's going to be a reduction. If there were a deep problem with the idea that actions are basic, then we'd be probably willing to take on and get around those costs. But why should we have such an expectation? Our ascriptive practices suggest that actions are just as basic as any other things in that list. Why are we happy with desires or intentions or beliefs? Why are they okay? Why do we not compose them into component parts? But what's the problematic? There's nothing in our practices that suggest that actions are particularly problematic. Okay, so it's not, I mean, obviously, if the reductionist had produced a really successful reduction, that might put pressure on us to think, oh, I thought they were basic and it turned out that they weren't. Or perhaps we have, if you had some reason to think that basic things can't be physical and actions are pretty obviously physical. But actually, given our framing assumptions, beliefs and intentions and desires are physical 2. Okay, so what I want to do now is speed up. I want to pursue this idea. This talk is a progress is just saying less and less, basically. So let's say that we take on the claim that actions are prime. We're not claiming anything like firstness, we're just claiming basicness. But maybe we can pursue, as it were, other aspects of Williamson's modeling to be able to understand better, as it were, what we're saying when we say that actions are prime. So this is Williamson's table. He thinks that there's a very smooth translation from what's going on in the knowledge case to what's going on in the action case. It's the first 3 lines you should intend to. So as in the action case, intention corresponds to the role belief plays in the knowledge case, and a success condition, which he calls A5s, corresponds to truth in the knowledge case. And what he says is, look, here's how you can think of the mistaken reductionists' project. They say knowledge is belief plus truth plus some further ingredient that makes it sufficient. And actions are intentions. I don't know why they're intentions rather than tryings, but for Williamson, intentions plus success plus some other thing that's going to make the formula come out. Okay, but he says the reductionist is wrong to think that. The reductionist should rather think, well, in particular the case of knowledge, but he suggests also in the case of action, as in some way a basic relation, a fundamental relation, not built out of other elements. What is fundamental to mind is not a bunch of monadic qualitative properties making up an inner world, but a network of relations between an agent and the environment, a network of relations between an agent and the environment. Relations such as seeing, referring, loving, hating, and all sorts of ways of acting intentionally on things. It's an illusion that the way to pure mind is by abstracting from such relations, as wrong-headed as the idea that the way to play soccer is by extracting from the other team. Okay, so I want to pursue this idea. Okay, we've got a much more restricted explanatory project now. We're not going to try and understand action in other terms, but we could perhaps understand it as a basic relation between an agent and something. Okay, so action, knowledge we know, so if we're going to pursue the knowledge analogy, knowledge is a relation between a subject and a truth. Action, according to Williamson's table, is a relation between a subject and a success. A success he identifies as A5s. Okay, so I know what P is. P is a fact, and I understand what it is to say an agent stands in a relation to the fact when they know it. But now, in order to know what the correlative claim about action would be, I need to know what A5s is. What's A5s, in virtue of which the agent stands in relation to A5s when they act? Well, there's 2 possibilities. One is that A5s, as the grammar of it might suggest, is an action of A's. Okay, and the other possibility is that it's not an action of A's. It's, as it were, it's a change of A that just happens. Okay, well, let's go with the idea that it's an action of A's. Well, it looks like we've now, I think, got 2 choices. We've got to think about what's the relation between that action of A, A5s, and the action that is the relation. So A intentionally Phis is a relation between A and A5s. So either A phi just is the intentional action, or in which case A's just done one thing, or it's not, and then it looks like A's done two things, because A's intentionally phi'd and A's phi'd. Okay, so what if A does one thing? So A phi's here is just the same action as A intentionally phi's, just described in a different way. But surely it can't be that. A intentionally phi's can't be a relation, as it were, between A and itself. If it's identical with A phi's, then it can't be one of the relata in terms of which we're understanding it. So let's suppose that A does two things. So we avoid the absurdity of saying that A intentionally phi's is both the relation and one of its relata by saying, no, A phi's is a different kind of action. A does two things. Okay. But I think if we think that this is both, it seems to me, absurd, counterintuitive. I mean, what we did is we set out to try and give an account of acting intentionally as a relation between A and something. Oh, we've said, oh, sorry, that thing is an action. It's a distinct action, so it is genuinely a relation. And then I want to know, well, can you tell me an account of that action then, please? Is that non-relational? What's that? And if they say, no, it's the same thing, then I get a regress. So I take it that the lesson of this is that if the analogy holds, if acting intentionally is a relation between a subject and something, then it must be a relation to something that's a non-action. A phi's must pick out something that's a non-action of A's. Okay, to do this, we need to try and look at what kind of non-action could it be, and what's the relation that's going to exist in acting that brings it about. So what philosophers have tended to do, I think, they don't get there from this point, but I think this is what's happening, is they go back to the arithmetic. They go back to say, okay, well, A phi's, the condition A phi's has got to be something like a movement of A's body, something that occurs with A, an arm going up. But that's now they're committed to that not being A's action. Because if it were A's action, we'd be back with our problem. So they're committed to this thing happening with A as not being A's action. And then they tend to say, that's okay, it's not A's action, it's rather, we should think of actions like this, we should think of actions as causes in some way of their success conditions. Okay, how about that? How about that's the kind of relation? A intentionally phi, if A causes its success condition, the A phiing that's a non-action. Okay, one problem about this is that if actions are causes, then on this view, they can't exist independently of their effects. So don't forget, it's a basic relation. It's supposed to be understood in terms of its effects. But now we've got a causal relation. Maybe Hume's wrong, but that seems to me a worry that you have. Looks as though you could have the action taking place and the effect not taking place, and that's bad. Then you're acting without your body moving. So then there's a introduction of a sort of vocabulary of bringings about or causings. Okay, now causings, unlike causes, are dependent upon the things that they cause. You can't be a causing of aphis, understood as a non-action, unless aphis exists. Okay, I'm going to set aside the fact that I think I don't understand what a causing is. But I think there's another more sort of brute or common sense problem about this move. Is we've now, I mean, it's the move that happened when we said that aphis isn't an action. That we've now separated out the action from the thing that happened, right? Whereas when I gave my example and I said, I raised my arm and you saw my arm go up, I take it that you thought that was my action that you had access to. So there's a kind of, I think there's a double alienation in this view. One is that since that you only have access to the effects, I don't know if effects is the right word for causings, the things brought about or caused when there are causings. So my arm moving isn't my action. Or you have a kind of alienation from the inside, that the thing that I've done isn't the bodily change that's taken place. So it seems to me we want our action theory to make it the case that the me change is the action. The change that took place is the action. Now, there may be other relations that we can appeal to, and I'm actually neutral. I tried to think about this a bit, and in many ways that's where my instincts go. There may be other relations, but whatever they are and however we fill them out, they need to respect what we can call the Danto thought. We are our actions and one with the relevant reaches of our body. So there's not an agent on the one side, or a causing or a cause, and his action or the other, but with the problem of how they are to be connected. So one sort of simple move is to just deny what we could call relationalism. Just deny that action is to be understood. When we claim actions are prime, that we should understand them on the analogy of knowledge is prime. That is, as a relation between an agent and some worldly condition. So we could say action, like knowledge, is basic, but action, unlike knowledge, is not a relation between A and a success condition. And that's actually a really plausible, natural thing to say. The action is the succeeding. Right? It's not independent of some kind of success condition. It is the succeeding. Knowledge is a relation between a subject and a truth. Nobody thinks knowledge is the truth. Okay, and I think action theorists need to thereby be a bit, I mean, it's so cool when you get this table and you think, oh, I'm off, you know, but I think we need to be very wary of pursuing the analogy too far. I mean, I think, and actually when you start to think about what could this success condition be, I think the breakdown of the analogy is telling, and perhaps we could have expected it all along? I mean, it's hard to know, so now I'll make some gnomic remarks. In the case of knowledge, if you like, the identity of the thing known is independent of the knowing of it. I mean, maybe there are self-referential thoughts that could cause problems for that. And in many ways, I think it might cause problems for a relational view of knowledge. In action, the identity of the thing known is not independent of the doing of it. Okay, if we were God, and knowing P were just to make P true, i.e. if every, as it were, act of knowledge, or if one were in a knowledge relation, was sufficient unto make P true, then perhaps relationalism wouldn't work for knowledge either. Okay, so let me finish. Does action come first? I want to go back to that question. Should we, could we, once we've realized how little there is to say about the fact that knowledge is prime, could we go back to saying, okay, they're first, it's in some way takes explanatory priority. And again, I wanted to issue a warning. So on the knowledge first picture, I mean, one of the things that works on that picture is you think, okay, you've got a subject and you've got the truth. And then you've got this, like, uber relation, this basic relation that holds between them. And then, in terms of that, you have all these weaker relations, you know, evidential relations or belief relations, and so on. And then the thought comes, okay, well, which of these relations is somehow the primary one, which is going to be first in our order of explanations? And Williamson ingeniously and brilliantly thinks, you know, the knowledge relation is somehow the primary relation, and we need to understand the others as weaker or defective, or even understand them as aiming in some way, or to be understood in terms of the knowledge relation. This suggests that if we're going to do an action first philosophy of mind, we can't take that model. We can't think, okay, you've got an agent on the one hand, and then you've got this success condition on the other. And now we're going to look at, as it were, mere intention, or look at these other psychological notions as defective but similar relations between those two things, in terms of which we're going to understand that. Because you're not going to have, or you may not have, the necessarily relata to do the work. Okay, I'm going to stop there.